that, I now recognize Ms. Malliotakis from New York for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stay-at-home orders and lockdowns that were arguably necessary at the beginning of the pandemic due to the lack of information surrounding this novel virus, they quickly became less and less justifiable, as the significant collateral damage they caused economically, educationally, religiously, and to the physical and mental health became more apparent, and as many public health experts began to question their efficacy, these orders became increasingly problematic. To make matters worse, political favoritism and unequal application, enforcement, reinforced the hypocrisy behind these executive rules. As noted by Justice Neil Gorsuch, they closed businesses, schools, and churches, quote, even as they allowed casinos and other favored businesses to carry on. Of course, it wasn't just casinos, but bars, liquor stores, marijuana dispensaries, and many more were allowed to stay open, most without restrictions. And this was particularly the case in the city that I represent, New York City. Perhaps the most egregious, we had BLM protesters and riots in the summer of 2020 where thousands gathered in close contact, resulted in billions of dollars in damages, complete lawlessness on some nights in cities across the country. And these protests were not only permitted, but they were encouraged by many of the same officials that shut down schools and places of worship and had condemned activists who held outdoor protests against lockdowns in April and May of 2020. This is not science, this is hypocrisy. Governor Andrew Cuomo not only arbitrarily restricted places of worship using color-coded zone-based restrictions, capping attendance in red zones at just 10 occupants, but singled out and threatened the Orthodox Jewish community, saying, quote, if you're not willing to live with these rules, then I'm going to close the synagogues, unquote. He blamed them for spiking cases in a city of 8 million, calling it an quote, ultra-Orthodox cluster, unquote. All right? A guy named Heshi Tischler is a high-profile Orthodox Jewish activist. He was arrested in October of 2020 on charges related to inciting a riot following an anti-lockdown protest in the Orthodox Jewish community. Again, this is months following all those riots, all those protests, windows being smashed, police cars being put on fire. All right? And let's not talk about what happened to those individuals, because all those charges have been dropped, by the way, and some of them are even profiting. They're getting paid by the city of New York for their inconveniences of being arrested for those riots. The Supreme Court would ultimately strike down these restrictions, finding that they violated the First Amendment's protection of the free exercise of religion. Mr. Teitlin, I know that you were involved in this case. Can you speak to the hypocrisy of Governor Cuomo and Mayor Bill de Blasio's treatment of religious groups compared to other secular groups and the protesters?
Yes, thank you. So when we were litigating that case, we heard some of the same stuff in the legal papers from the state of New York that we just heard from the ranking member. This is science-based, et cetera, et cetera. Yet they had exclusions for essential businesses and essential gatherings that were not based on even on their own claims that it was risk-based. And we asked them, what are essential gatherings? Why are other gatherings more essential than religious worship? They couldn't tell us. We said, what are even essential gatherings? They couldn't even tell us what this category of essential gatherings was that was favored over religious worship. But yet when the Buffalo Bills made the playoffs, Governor Cuomo decided that the fans could attend the Buffalo Bills playoff game in certainly much closer quarters than he was allowing the religious institutions to gather. So I guess we learned that attending a football game is more essential than worshiping. And so what we then learned through public reporting, and then which would have been part of discovery in the case if the governor of New York hadn't just given in and given us everything we asked for at the end of the lawsuit, was that the decisions about the color-coded systems, they weren't being made by public health officials. When a bunch of public health officials quit Governor Cuomo's regime, they told the press, well, the governor was essentially picking those zones by himself based upon the fear and based upon his perception that the Orthodox Jews were causing the problems. When we were at the U.S. Supreme Court fighting against these restrictions, we had groups, we had Muslim American groups came in supporting false amicus brief in support of us that said this targeting of religious minorities, blaming them for the pandemic, is the kind of thing that we've seen throughout history, and that was what Governor Cuomo was doing to the Orthodox Jewish community that led to these unconstitutional restrictions, which the U.S. Supreme Court struck down.
So in my last 10 seconds, in your opinion, he was basing these decisions on his political preferences, right, or what he thought was important versus what is equal treatment under the law and science.
He was targeting the Orthodox Jewish community in his statements and in the way he gerrymandered the districts, and we now know he wasn't listening to his public health officials who, when they quit, said so.
Thank you.